The Mistral Inc. studio sat at the edge of an industrial district, hidden between derelict warehouses and forgotten alleyways. Samantha wouldn't have noticed it if not for the peeling, hand-painted sign that read, "Tattoos for Transformation." She'd stumbled across the name online, in a dusty corner of an alternative tattoo forum, where users whispered about an artist who worked wonders, and occasionally nightmares. Samantha was desperate for a change. Her life had become an endless string of mundane days and restless nights. Her boyfriend had left without a word. Her job was soul-sucking. The promise of transformation felt like a lifeline. So here she was, staring at the dim light glowing behind the studio's frosted windows, wondering if she was making a mistake. When she stepped inside, the air smelled of ink and something earthy, like damp soil after rain. The space was dimly lit, cluttered with bookshelves overflowing with thick tomes and jars of peculiar trinkets, dried herbs, animal bones, and small, unidentifiable objects. The walls were adorned with sketches unlike any she'd seen before, symbols and patterns that seemed to writhe and dance if she stared too long. "You came," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows. Samantha flinched. From behind a curtain emerged a tall man with strikingly pale skin and eyes the color of smoke. His movements were deliberate, predatory. His name was Elias, though he never offered it. Samantha had learned it from the forum. "I'm looking for something unique," Samantha stammered. "Something to mark a new beginning." Elias tilted his head, a faint smile curling his lips. "You seek transformation. I can give it to you. But what I offer is not for the faint-hearted." Samantha swallowed hard. "I'm ready." Without another word, Elias led her to a worn leather chair and began sketching directly on her skin. He worked quickly, his movements fluid and precise. The design began to take shape, swirling lines that seemed to shift and flow even as they were inked. "What does it mean?" Samantha asked, unable to tear her eyes away from the intricate pattern. "It is a doorway," Elias said cryptically, "a path to something greater." The needle's buzz filled the room, and Samantha braced herself for the pain. To her surprise, it felt different, not painful, but warm, as if the ink were alive, seeping into her veins. A strange drowsiness overtook her, and the world blurred. When she awoke, the tattoo was complete. Elias was gone, and a single mirror stood in front of her. She gasped as she saw the design, a swirling, mesmerizing array of symbols covering her shoulder and spreading down her arm. The lines seemed to shimmer, almost as if they were breathing. That night, Samantha couldn't stop staring at the tattoo. It felt like a part of her, pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. Sleep didn't come easily. Her dreams were vivid, filled with dark forests and towering spires, symbols carved into the bark of ancient trees. In the distance, she heard whispers, words in a language she didn't understand. She woke with a start, drenched in sweat. Her arm felt strange. When she turned on the light, she screamed. The tattoo had changed. The swirling patterns were still there, but a new symbol had appeared, jagged and sharp like a warning. Worse, it seemed to move slightly under her skin, as if alive. "Maybe I'm imagining it," she whispered, her voice trembling. She snapped a picture with her phone to prove to herself it wasn't real. But when she compared it to the photos from the studio, the changes were undeniable. By morning, the symbol had grown, snaking tendrils spreading toward her neck. Panic set in, and Samantha decided to return to the studio. She marched through the industrial district, heart pounding, only to find the door locked and the studio dark. There was no sign of Elias. She tried calling the number from the forum post, but it rang endlessly. Frustrated and terrified, she turned to the forum itself, posting a desperate plea for help. Within minutes, replies flooded in. "You saw Elias? You need to get rid of it. Now! The tattoo is cursed. It feeds on you. Find an exorcist, or someone who deals in occult practices." Samantha's heart raced. This couldn't be real. Curses weren't real. But the tattoo continued to shift throughout the day, revealing more symbols that seemed to hum with energy. And then, the first hallucination happened. It started with a sound, a low, guttural growl coming from the corner of her apartment. Samantha froze, turning her head slowly. The shadows in the corner seemed thicker than they should be, twisting unnaturally. A figure emerged, its eyes glowing faintly. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The figure didn't respond. It took a step closer, and Samantha could see its skin, etched with the same symbols as her tattoo, glowing faintly. She screamed and scrambled for the door, but when she turned back, the figure was gone. She felt the tattoo burning on her arm, the heat unbearable. When she pulled up her sleeve, another symbol had appeared, a large, circular design that resembled an eye. By the time the second night fell, Samantha's world had unraveled. The tattoo was spreading rapidly, the symbols growing more complex and sinister. Her dreams were filled with horrifying visions, shadowy figures chanting in unison, her own reflection grinning back at her with malicious intent, and always the symbols, twisting, shifting, consuming. Samantha realized the tattoo wasn't just altering her body, it was altering her mind. She felt an inexplicable pull toward dark places, an urge to isolate herself, and flashes of anger she couldn't control. She knew she had to find Elias, but the deeper she delved into the mystery, the more she realized that what she'd invited into her life wasn't just a tattoo. It was something ancient, malevolent, and hungry. Samantha's days became a blur of fear and obsession. Every waking moment was consumed by the shifting tattoo and the dark symbols it revealed. Each night brought new horrors, whispers in languages she didn't know, shadows that moved without cause, and a sense of being watched. Her attempts to contact Elias yielded nothing. The forum where she'd first found his name was gone, as if it had been erased. Even her desperate trips back to the studio found only a locked door and silence. It was as if Elias had never existed. But Samantha couldn't escape the tattoo, or the escalating dread it brought. On the third night, Samantha found herself unable to sleep. The tattoo burned like a brand, sending jolts of pain up her arm. The symbols now covered her shoulder, wrapping around her collarbone. Each new mark felt heavier, like it carried a weight she couldn't bear. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the air seemed to grow colder. Her breath misted in front of her, and she felt an unnatural stillness settle over the room. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, barely audible, but they grew louder, coalescing into a low, guttural chant. Samantha bolted upright, clutching her arm. "Who's there?" she shouted. The shadows in the corner of the room began to writhe, twisting into a shape that was almost human. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its body was covered in the same symbols as her tattoo. But this time, it didn't disappear. "You invited us," it hissed, its voice like dry leaves scraping together. "You opened the door." Samantha backed against the wall, trembling. "What do you want from me?" The figure stepped closer, its movements jerky and unnatural, to complete what was started. Before she could scream, it lunged, and everything went black. Samantha woke on the floor, her head pounding. Morning light streamed through the window, but it did nothing to dispel the terror. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting around the room. The shadowy figure was gone, but her arm was throbbing with pain. She pulled up her sleeve and gasped. The tattoo had spread overnight, the symbols now creeping down toward her wrist and up her neck. One new symbol, a jagged spiral, seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. She couldn't deny it any longer. The tattoo was consuming her. Desperate for answers, Samantha turned to the internet again, this time searching for occult practitioners. She found a name, Madame Carey's, a reclusive mystic known for dealing with unnatural problems. Samantha didn't hesitate. She called the number and begged for an appointment. Madame Carey's lived in a crumbling old house on the outskirts of town. Samantha hesitated at the door, her unease growing with every second. But the tattoo burned fiercely, spurring her forward. The door creaked open before she could knock. A thin, elderly woman with piercing gray eyes stood in the doorway, her gaze immediately locking onto Samantha's arm. "You carry a heavy burden," Madame Carey said, her voice a mix of pity and warning. "Come inside." The interior of the house was cluttered with talismans, dried herbs, and candles. The air was thick with the scent of incense. Madame Carey's motioned for Samantha to sit and began inspecting the tattoo. "This is no ordinary ink," she murmured. "It's a binding, a contract." "A contract with what?" Samantha asked, her voice shaking. Madame Carey's didn't answer immediately. She traced the symbols with her fingers, her expression growing darker. "This tattoo is a doorway to another realm. Each symbol strengthens the connection, allowing something to come through." Samantha's blood ran cold. "How do I stop it?" The mystic's eyes narrowed. "Stopping it is not so simple. You've invited a powerful force into your life. It won't let go easily." "There must be something I can do," Samantha pleaded. "I'll do anything." Madame Carey sighed. "There is a ritual that might sever the connection, but it is dangerous. If it fails, the consequences could be catastrophic for you and for anyone near you." Samantha didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." Madame Carey spent the next few hours preparing the ritual. She drew intricate symbols on the floor, their patterns eerily similar to those on Samantha's arm. Candles were placed at precise intervals, their flames flickering as if in anticipation. "You must stay inside the circle at all costs," the mystic instructed. "No matter what happens, do not leave. The circle is your only protection." Samantha nodded, her heart pounding. She felt the tattoo burning more intensely, as if it knew what was coming. Madame Carey's lit the candles and began chanting in a language Samantha didn't recognize. The air grew heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. The symbols on the floor began to glow, and the room was filled with an eerie hum. Suddenly, the tattoo on Samantha's arm flared with light. She screamed as the symbols writhed, twisting and morphing before her eyes. The room seemed to spin, and a deep, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. "They're here," Madame Carey's whispered, her voice trembling. The shadows in the room began to coalesce, forming into grotesque shapes that defied logic. Samantha clutched her arm, the pain unbearable. The figures lunged at the circle, but each time, they were repelled by an invisible barrier. "You must resist them," Madame Carey shouted. "They're trying to break your will." But Samantha's vision blurred, and her mind filled with horrifying images, flashes of a dark, desolate landscape, filled with towering spires and writhing creatures. She felt a pull, an overwhelming urge to step out of the circle. The shadows grew more aggressive, their attacks shaking the room. One managed to breach the barrier, reaching for Samantha with clawed hands. She screamed as it grabbed her arm, its touch searing her skin. Madame Carey shouted an incantation, and the creature dissolved into smoke. But the effort left the mystic weakened. "This is stronger than I expected," she gasped. "We must end this now." She began chanting louder, her voice filled with urgency. The symbols on the floor flared brighter, and the shadows shrieked in pain. Samantha felt the tattoo burning hotter than ever, as if it were fighting to stay attached to her. With a final, deafening roar, the shadows vanished, leaving the room eerily silent. Samantha collapsed, her body trembling. The tattoo on her arm was still there, but the symbols had stopped moving. Madame Carey's knelt beside her, exhaustion etched on her face. "It's not over," the mystic said. "The connection is weakened, but it's not broken. The force behind this tattoo is ancient and powerful. It will come for you again." Samantha's heart sank. She'd hoped the ritual would end her nightmare, but it seemed she was only buying time. "Then what do I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Madame Carey's looked at her with a mix of pity and determination. "You find Elias. He's the only one who knows how to truly sever the bond." Samantha staggered home, her arm throbbing with residual heat from the ritual. She felt drained, both physically and emotionally. The tattoo remained, its symbols dormant for now, but Madame Carey's warning echoed in her mind. "The force will come for you again." She needed to find Elias. Samantha booted up her laptop, revisiting the now-defunct tattoo forum. Hours passed as she scoured the web for clues about Elias. She searched through cache archives, obscure chat rooms, and social media groups dedicated to occult practices. Finally, she found a breadcrumb, a blog post written years ago by someone named Victor Knox. The post described an encounter with Elias, detailing a tattoo that had given the author strange visions and an uncontrollable hunger for power. Victor claimed he'd found a way to survive, but the post abruptly ended with a cryptic line, "The answers lie in the forgotten well." Samantha tracked Victor to a small town 2 hours away. She packed a bag, hoping he might still be there and alive. Victor lived in a dilapidated house at the end of a dirt road. Samantha hesitated before knocking, her heart pounding. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a gaunt man with sunken eyes and jittery hands. His gaze flicked to Samantha's tattoo, and he immediately pulled her inside, locking the door. "You found him," Victor said, his voice a rasp. "Elias." Samantha nodded. "I need to stop this. Madame Carries said you might know how." Victor barked a bitter laugh. "Carries is good, but she doesn't know Elias like I do. That tattoo isn't just ink, it's a beacon. He's marked you for something far worse than you can imagine." "What does he want?" Samantha demanded. Victor hesitated, then gestured to a scar running down his forearm. "Elias's tattoos are tied to another plane of existence. They let things come through. If he marked you, it's because he needs you to complete the connection." "Complete the connection?" Samantha whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. Victor nodded grimly. "You're the host. Once the tattoo consumes you, it'll open a doorway, permanently." Samantha's breath caught. "How do I stop it?" Victor shook his head. "I don't know if you can, but if there's a chance, it lies at the Forgotten Well." Victor explained that the Forgotten Well was an ancient site, older than the town itself, hidden deep in the forest. Legends said it was a place of power, where boundaries between worlds grew thin. It was there Victor believed that Elias drew his energy. Armed with Victor's crude map and dire warnings, Samantha ventured into the woods. The forest felt oppressive, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. As she trudged deeper, the tattoo began to stir again, the symbols shifting and glowing faintly. The closer she got to the well, the louder the whispers became. They seemed to come from the trees themselves, their branches clawing at her as she passed. Finally, she reached a clearing. At its center stood a stone well, ancient and weathered, covered in moss and faintly glowing runes. Samantha approached cautiously, her heart hammering in her chest. As Samantha peered into the well, she saw a swirling darkness, as if the void itself lived within. The whispers grew louder, forming coherent words. "Come closer, surrender, become." She stumbled back, clutching her arm as the tattoo burned with searing intensity. The symbols pulsed, and she felt herself being drawn toward the well, her body no longer her own. A shadow emerged from the darkness, its form fluid and unnatural. It spoke with Elias's voice. "You've come far, Samantha. The change is nearly complete." Her voice trembled as she shouted, "What have you done to me?" Elias's figure stepped closer, his features shifting and distorted. "I offered you transformation, and you accepted. Now, you will become the vessel." Samantha screamed as the tattoo flared to life, spreading across her chest and neck. She dropped to her knees, fighting the pull of the well. But the void's power was overwhelming. Suddenly, a burst of light shattered the darkness. Madame Carries appeared, her frail form radiating with energy. She chanted in a language Samantha didn't understand, her voice cutting through the oppressive whispers. Elias's shadow recoiled, hissing, "You cannot stop this, old woman. The bond is too strong." Madame Carries ignored him, her focus on the symbols glowing around the well. She poured salt from a pouch, creating a barrier around Samantha. The tattoo's burning subsided slightly, and Samantha gasped for air. "You must sever the connection," Carrie said urgently. "Destroy the well." "How?" Samantha cried, her voice breaking. Carries handed her a dagger inscribed with runes. "Plunge this into the center of the well. It will collapse the doorway, but you must be prepared for what comes next." Elias's shadow lunged at them, but Carries held it at bay with a wave of her hand. "Go, Samantha! Now!" Samantha staggered to her feet, the dagger heavy in her hand. The whispers grew deafening as she approached the well, the void's pull nearly overwhelming. She raised the dagger high, her hands trembling. Elias's voice filled the clearing. If you do this, you'll destroy yourself. The tattoo is part of you now. Severing the bond will sever your soul. Tears streamed down Samantha's face as she hesitated. She felt the tattoo pulsing, a part of her that had grown both terrifying and familiar. But she knew she couldn't let it consume her, or anyone else. With a scream, she plunged the dagger into the heart of the well. The world erupted in light and sound. The ground shook, and the well collapsed inward, sucking the shadowy figure of Elias and the swirling void into its depths. Samantha felt the tattoo burn hotter than ever. And then nothing. Samantha woke in the forest clearing, the well reduced to rubble. Madame Carey's knelt beside her, pale but alive. Samantha's arm felt strangely light. She looked down and saw that the tattoo was gone, leaving only faint scars where the symbols had been. "You severed the bond," Carey said softly. "The doorway is closed." Samantha's relief was tempered by a deep emptiness. She felt as though a piece of her had been ripped away, leaving a void she couldn't quite explain. But she was free. As she walked out of the forest, Samantha knew her life would never be the same. The shadows might have been banished, but their memory lingered, a chilling reminder of how close she'd come to losing herself completely. Samantha returned to her apartment, her body trembling with exhaustion. The tattoo was gone, and the horrifying symbols no longer haunted her skin. But the memories lingered, a vivid nightmare etched into her mind. Every shadow seemed to harbor a threat, and every faint sound sent her heart racing. Madame Carey's words echoed in her mind. "The doorway is closed, but the bond leaves scars on your body and your soul." Samantha tried to believe she was safe, but the emptiness inside her whispered otherwise. The first night back was restless. Samantha's dreams were fragmented, a mix of Elias's shadowy figure and the swirling void of the forgotten well. She woke with a start, her heart pounding, and reached for the light. But when the room illuminated, she froze. On the wall opposite her bed was a faint mark, a symbol, barely visible but unmistakable. It was one of the tattoos that had haunted her arm. She leapt from bed, scrubbing at the wall, but the mark wouldn't fade. The whispers started again that night, faint and fleeting. Samantha told herself it was her imagination, the residual trauma of her ordeal. But deep down, she knew better. Desperate for answers, Samantha returned to Victor's house. She found him more unhinged than before, his eyes wild with fear. "You destroyed the well," Victor said, pacing nervously. "But that doesn't mean it's over." "What do you mean?" Samantha asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Victor grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "The tattoo wasn't just a doorway. It was an invitation. You were marked for something, and those forces don't forget. Destroying the well might have delayed them, but they'll find another way." Samantha shook her head. "No." Madame Carey said the bond was severed. Victor's laugh was bitter. "You think it's that simple? Elias wasn't just some artist. He was their servant. And now, they'll be looking for someone else to finish what you started." In the following days, Samantha's world unraveled further. The faint symbols began appearing elsewhere, on her walls, her windows, even her skin. They weren't as vivid as before, but they pulsed faintly, like embers waiting to ignite. She began hearing whispers in broad daylight, feeling unseen eyes on her wherever she went. Her reflection in the mirror seemed off. At times, it would hold her gaze a second too long, or smile faintly when she wasn't. Madame Carey's cryptic warnings now seemed woefully inadequate. Samantha felt the darkness closing in again, but this time, it was more insidious. It wasn't about consuming her outright. It was about wearing her down, breaking her will. One night, Samantha woke to find her room suffused with an unnatural chill. The air felt heavy, pressing down on her chest. She sat up slowly, her breath visible in the freezing air. The corner of her room darkened, shadows pooling and twisting. From them emerged a familiar figure, Elias. "You thought you could escape," he said, his voice a low growl. "You thought you could destroy what we are." Samantha's voice trembled. I severed the bond. You're gone. Elias's laugh was chilling. You severed one tether, but the mark remains. You can never truly be free. The shadows around him grew, spreading toward her. Samantha scrambled out of bed, her pulse racing. What do you want from me? To finish what was started, Elias said, his form flickering like a dying flame. The well may be gone, but there are others. You cannot outrun this, Samantha. It's in you now. Samantha knew she couldn't face this alone. She sought out Madame Carey's again, this time demanding the full truth. I told you the bond leaves scars, Carey said, her voice heavy with regret. Destroying the well weakened their hold, but it didn't erase it. You're still a beacon, Samantha. They can find you. Then how do I stop it? Samantha pleaded. How do I end this for good? Carey's hesitated. There's one way. A cleansing ritual, one far more dangerous than the first. It would mean facing them directly in their realm. If you succeed, you could destroy their connection to this world forever. But if you fail, Samantha's stomach churned. What happens if I fail? They'll claim you completely, Carey said softly. Body, mind, and soul. Samantha didn't see another choice. If she didn't act, the darkness would consume her life piece by piece. With Carey's help, she began preparing for the ritual. It required rare ingredients, obsidian shards, powdered bone, and a vial of her own blood. Over the course of several days, Samantha and Carey's worked tirelessly, drawing intricate sigils, mixing potent concoctions, and chanting incantations to weaken the bond. Each step pushed Samantha closer to the edge, her energy draining with every passing hour. On the eve of the ritual, Carey's handed Samantha a small charm. This will protect you in their realm, if you keep your will strong. But remember, Samantha, the real battle is within. They'll try to break you. Samantha nodded, clutching the charm tightly. She was terrified, but she couldn't let the fear stop her. The ritual began at midnight. Carey's lit candles and began chanting, her voice resonating with unnatural power. The air in the room grew thick, vibrating with energy. Samantha felt the tattoo. Now faint scars begin to burn again. A portal opened in the center of the room, swirling with darkness and flickering light. Carey's gestured for Samantha to step through. This is your fight, Carey said. I can't follow you. Samantha took a deep breath and stepped into the void. The air was icy and thin as Samantha emerged into the other realm. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, like a surface that shifted and pulsed in response to her presence. The world around her was an endless expanse of swirling darkness, punctuated by distant, faintly glowing symbols etched into the horizon, symbols she recognized from her cursed tattoo. The whispers began immediately, louder and more insistent than ever. They came from everywhere and nowhere, pulling at her mind, filling her with fear and doubt. You don't belong here. You cannot win. Surrender. Samantha clutched the charm Madame Carey's had given her, its warmth a small anchor in the overwhelming cold. Her grip on her resolve tightened. I'm not giving up, she muttered, stepping forward into the void. The journey through the realm was disorienting. The ground twisted and buckled, forcing her to walk a labyrinthine path. Symbols lit up beneath her feet with every step, flaring brightly before fading away, as if marking her progress. She felt watched, the weight of countless unseen eyes pressing down on her. Finally, she arrived at a massive structure, a monolith rising out of the void. Its surface was carved with intricate, glowing runes, shifting and pulsating like a living thing. At its base stood Elias, his form more solid here, his pale skin glowing faintly against the darkness. You shouldn't have come, he said, his voice reverberating through the realm. I'm here to end this, Samantha replied, her voice trembling but determined. Elias smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. You can't end what you've already become. This realm is as much a part of you now as your own heartbeat. Surrender, and you'll finally know peace. Samantha shook her head. This ends here. Elias raised his hand, and the shadows around him writhed, taking form. They surged toward Samantha, clawed hands reaching out to drag her down. She gripped the charm tightly and began chanting the incantation Madame Carys had taught her, her voice breaking through the oppressive whispers. The charm flared with light, repelling the shadows momentarily. Samantha used the reprieve to press forward, but the shadows regrouped, attacking with renewed ferocity. They clawed at her mind as much as her body, filling her thoughts with fear, doubt, and despair. "You are nothing," the voices hissed. "You are alone. You will fail." Samantha screamed, pushing through the mental assault. "I'm not alone," she shouted, holding the charm aloft. The light intensified, creating a barrier that drove the shadows back. As Samantha reached the base of the monolith, Elias stepped forward, his form shifting and distorting. His eyes burned with a malevolent light. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You're still marked. Even if you destroy me, the bond will remain. You cannot escape what you've become." Samantha ignored his words, focusing on the dagger Madame Carys had given her. She could feel its power pulsing in her hand, resonating with the energy of the monolith. Elias lunged at her, his form dissolving into a swarm of shadows that engulfed her. She felt their icy touch on her skin, their voices clawing at her resolve. Her grip on the dagger faltered, and for a moment, she thought she would succumb. But then she remembered Carys's words, "The real battle is within. They'll try to break you." Samantha steadied her mind, focusing on the warmth of the charm and the purpose that had brought her here. With a surge of determination, she plunged the dagger into the base of the monolith. The realm shook violently, the monolith cracking and splintering as a blinding light erupted from the point where the dagger struck. Elias screamed, his form shattering into fragments of shadow that dissolved into the void. The symbols on the horizon flared brightly, then began to fade. The ground beneath Samantha's feet buckled, threatening to pull her down with the collapsing realm. She clung to the dagger, her voice rising in a final chant as the void imploded around her. In a flash of light, everything went silent. Samantha woke on the floor of Madame Carys's home, the dagger still clutched in her hand. The air was warm, and the oppressive weight of the curse was gone. She sat up slowly, her body aching but intact. Carys knelt beside her, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "You did it," she said softly. "The connection is severed." Samantha looked down at her arm. The faint scars where the tattoo had been were still there, but they no longer pulsed with unnatural energy. The whispers were gone, and the emptiness inside her had been replaced by a quiet, fragile peace. The days that followed were a blur of recovery. Samantha spent her time reflecting on everything she had endured. She was free, but the scars, both physical and emotional, reminded her of how close she had come to losing herself. She visited Victor to tell him the news. He seemed relieved but wary. "You closed the door," he said, "but there will always be others willing to open it." Samantha nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll make sure they don't." Samantha left Madame Carys with a newfound purpose. The curse had been a nightmare, but it had also awakened something within her, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She couldn't undo the past, but she could ensure that no one else suffered the same fate. As she walked away from the house, the scars on her arm caught the sunlight, faintly shimmering. Samantha smiled faintly. She was no longer afraid of the shadows. She had faced them and won. For now, the darkness was quiet. But Samantha knew that if it ever returned, she would be ready.